Eruvin, Daf and Pei Test through Tzadi Hey. Daf Pei Test begins Perek called Gagos. The Mishnah brings three opinions about carrying kalim, carrying utensils, property, from different types of non-house domains. The Mishnah talks about Gagos, roofs, talks about chatzeros, courtyards, and karpifos, other types of non-residential domains. Normally, to carry in a chatzer, from a house to a chatzer to a courtyard, you need a Eruvin chatzeros. If you don't have an Eruvin chatzeros, so then the Mishnah brings three opinions about whether you can carry from one roof to another, roofs belong to different people, from one chatzer to another. The Tanakama says, Kol Gagos He'er Rishus Achas. Meir Shita is, all the roofs are considered one Rishus, you can carry from one to the other, even if they belong to different people. Each place is considered a separate Rishus. Rabbi Shimon, we pass like Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says, Echad Gagos, Ve'echad Chatzeros, Ve'echad Karpifos. All the roofs, all the courtyards, all the Karpifos are all considered Rishus Achasein. They're all considered one domain. You can carry property from one to the other, but that's only the Kalim Sheshavsu L'Tochan. Kalim that were there when Shabbos began, Ben Hashmashos when Shabbos began. If a Kalim was in the Chatzer, you can carry it to another Chatzer, to a roof, from a roof, to a Chatzer, and so on. Does not apply to Kalim Sheshavsu B'Tocha Bayis. Does not apply to Kalim that when Shabbos began were inside a home. So if a Keli is in your house and there's no Eruv, you can't carry it into the Chatzer. You can't if there is an Eruv in the Chatzer, but the Eruv doesn't join the two Chatzeres, you can't carry it from your house to the Chatzer to the next Chatzer. But what you can do, according to Rabbi Shimon, is if the Keli was in the Chatzer, then you can carry it to another Chatzer, even if there's no Eruv joining the two Chatzeres. And that's how we paskin. We paskin Gagin, Chatzeros, Karpifos, Rishus Echadhem. You can carry Kalim from one to the other if the Kalim were there, Ben Hashmashos. Doesn't matter if the Kalim went into the house after Ben Hashmashos, if the Keli was in the Chatzer throughout Ben Hashmashos until after Tesek Chavim, then you took it inside for the night, and then you brought it back out tomorrow, you can still take it to the neighboring Chatzer, that's fine. As long as it was in the Chatzer Ben Hashmashos, you can carry it from one to the other on Shabbos, even though the Chatzeros belong to different people, and there's no Eruv Chatzeros joining them, that's okay. And this is a major leniency in the laws of Eruvin Chatzeros, that even if you don't have a proper Eruvin Chatzeros, there's still some carrying that's okay. You're still allowed to carry from one Chatzer to another Chatzer. So the Netziv, for example, says, let's say you have an area that has proper fences, Tzuras Pesach, or walls around it, but doesn't have a proper Eruvin Chatzeros. In his case, the question was, you had Eruvin Chatzeros, what you didn't have was Chiris Rishus. We learned earlier that if there are non-Jews there, Eruv Chatzeros doesn't work for them, you have to rent a place from them. We rely on renting from municipal authorities, from the governor, from the mayor, from the council, from the police chief, from the fireman. But that's a somewhat dubious leniency. Many poskim are unhappy with it. So the Netziv says if a person doesn't want to rely on the Eruvin Chatzeros / Chiris Rishus, he can still carry because there are still fences. The only problem is that there isn't a proper Eruvin Chatzeros if you don't rely on the Chiris Rishus. What you do is, he says, avoid carrying from the house into the Chatzer. Just carry from one Chatzer to the other. So, for example, if you need a key, you have to have the key to your house, and you want to carry it with you when you leave the house and bring it back. So just don't leave the key in the house, Ben Hashmashos. Leave it in the Chatzer. If it's in the Chatzer, Ben Hashmashos, then you can carry it from one Chatzer to another Chatzer, and that's all fine. In the book, The Laws of an Eruv, the authors bring one of the primary reasons you want to use an Eruv is to carry a baby around. So if you don't have an Eruvin Chatzeros, or if you don't want to rely on the Chiris Rishus, as long as there are still proper fences and Tzuras Pesach, you just don't have a proper Chiris Rishus, you don't want to rely on the Chiris Rishus, they say, the baby himself doesn't cause problems, because he's not considered something who's Kona Shvisa inside the house. And the stroller, if you want to use a stroller, just leave the stroller in the Chatzer Ben Hashmashos. As long as the Chatzer was not in the house Ben Hashmashos, that's fine, that's okay. The toys, they say similarly, toys, if you leave toys in the Chatzer, balls, riding toys, whatever they are, then you can move them from one Chatzer to another Chatzer on Shabbos, even if there's no Eruv joining the two Chatzeros. Again, as long as there are fences and Tzuras Pesachs. If the only problem is you don't have a proper Eruv Chatzeros or Chiris Rishus, you can still move them from one Chatzer to another as long as they were in the Chatzer Ben Hashmashos, as long as they were not inside the house. They bring that contemporary poskim disagree about the status of an open porch. An open porch, is that like a house or is that like a Chatzer? If you left stuff, you left toys, you left other things in an open porch, Ben Hashmashos, and then you want to move them to your neighbor's porch, and you don't have an Eruvin Chatzeros connecting the two houses, the two areas, then it depends. If the porch is like a house, then it's kelim sheshav subabayis. They cannot be transferred to a neighbor's premises. If the porch is like a chatzar, and then it's kelim sheshav subachatzar, and then they can be freely transferred from your premises to your neighbor's premises. On Daf Tzadi, the Gemara talks about ships, brings Machlokes Rav and Shmuel, whether you can carry in a ship. The ship has walls. The problem is, Rashi explains, the walls are not mukaf l'dira. We learned earlier in the Masechta that in order to carry, if you have an area that is larger than a Beis HaSayim, larger than 50 amma by 100 ammas, midrabanan, you're only allowed to carry if the mechitzos are hukaf l'dira, if the mechitzos were there for dira. It's Machlokes Rav and Shmuel. Rav says these walls are bona fide walls, they allow you to carry, it is considered hukaf l'dira. Shmuel says these walls are not considered hukaf l'dira. Why are the walls there? Why do you have walls in a boat? To keep out the water. That's not called hukaf l'dira. How do we paskin? Shmuel himself conceded we paskin like Rav. The Gemara says they asked Rav Chia bar Yosef. Rav Chia bar Yosef asked Shmuel, Hilchasa kavasach or Hilchasa karav? Is the halacha like you or is the halacha like Rav? So remarkably, Shmuel answered Hilchasa karav. Even though I said differently, the halacha is like Rav. We find a similar Gemara in Baba Basra. The Gemara says there also, Rav Nachman asked Rav Huna, is the halacha like us, like Rav Nachman and my group, or is the halacha like you? Halacha kavasaychu. And Rav Huna said, halacha is like you. Even though we disagree, the halacha is like you. Why? Because you're close to the Reish Galusa, there are a lot of Dayanim there, so you have expertise in Choshen Mishpat, which was apparently the issue over there. But there also we said, even though I disagreed with you, the halacha is like you. Contemporary Rabbi Rabbi David Kochav says that this is unusual, but you have this. It shows the great honesty of the Chachmei Hashas. Even when they thought they were right, sometimes they were willing to concede that as a matter of halacha, the halacha doesn't follow their view; it follows the other view. In this case, though, we do paskin like Rav. We saw even Shmuel agreed. Even Shmuel conceded we paskin like Rav, that if you have walls on a ship, we paskin leniently. Those walls are considered hukaf l'dira, and you're allowed to carry stuff around on the ship. A couple of other halachas mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch about carrying on ships, though. First of all, you have the issue of Eruvin chatzeros. If there are different cabins in the ship, if individual passengers have their own cabins, and they didn't make an Eruvin chatzeros joining all their domains, then you're not allowed to carry property from your cabin to the common areas or to other people's cabins, because just like when you have multiple houses in a chatzar, you need Eruvin chatzeros. Tents and encampments belong to different people. You need Eruvin chatzeros, and therefore, you're not going to be able to carry from your cabin, kalim, from your cabin to another cabin or to a common area without an Eruvin chatzeros. You can still carry in the common areas of the ship, just like we saw. Kalim sheshav subachatzar, you're allowed to carry kalim around in the chatzar. You just can't carry from your house to the chatzar, so you can carry stuff around in the common areas of the ship. You just can't carry from your cabin. You can't carry from your cabin to the ship. On Daf Tzadi Aleph, the Gemara is discussing going back to this mission in Kol Gagos Ha'er, we're discussing the different opinions about whether you need a Eruvin chatzeros to carry from one chatzar to a gag, from one gag to another gag. There are different opinions in the Mishnah. So the Gemara at one point brings a raya that it says that b'shas sakana they couldn't read the Sefer Torah openly. There was a problem with holding normal Kriyas Torah. They had to do it clandestinely. So it says they would carry the Sefer Torah through a circuitous route. They would carry it mechatzer legag, from a courtyard to a roof, megag lechatzer, from a roof to a chatzer, mechatzer lekarpe, from a courtyard to a karpe, from another kind of non-residential domain, to read the Torah. So you see, you don't need Eruvin chatzeros. The Gemara said, no, ein shas sakana raya. That was a special dispensation because of shas sakana. Otherwise, it would indeed have been a problem of Eruv. Magen Avraham raises an interesting question. Magen Avraham says, there's a machlokes, Rishonim, two opinions in Shulchan Aruch. We had it earlier in the Masechta, whether you're allowed to do a shvus to shvus, to ask a non-Jew to do malacha d'Rabbanan for the purpose of mitzvah. The Gemara brought about Mila. They were allowed to ask a non-Jew to carry water the baby needed through a chatzar she'eina mureves, a chatzar without a proper eruv, because that was shvus to shvus for Mila. So it sounds like shvus to shvus is mutter for a mitzvah. But there are some Rishonim said that was only Mila itself. Mila itself is a mitzvah, that the mitzvah itself is Doch HaShabbos itself, so shvus to shvus, to get the water, is also mutter. Other mitzvahs, you can't do shvus to shvus for the purpose of mitzvah. Magen Avraham asks, but here they have to get a Sefer Torah, and because of Shas Sakana they couldn't do it openly, so they allowed carrying it through a Chatzar She'eina Moreves, the Gemara says. We pass like Rabbi Shimon, carrying from Gag l'Chatzar maybe wouldn't be an issue. wouldn't be an issue. But the Gemara is going according to the positions that it would be a problem, and it was mutter because of shas sakana. So they allowed carrying through a chatzar she'ein mureves from one chatzar to another without an eruv. They allowed that for the purpose of mitzvah. They couldn't do it openly because of shas sakana. They allowed you to do this for a mitzvah. So you see, because of mitzvahs, they were willing to waive the isur drabanan of carrying in a chatzar she'ein mureves. Magen Avraham says it's a good question. You have to say ein medamen b'shvusin. Different types of isurei shvus for mitzvah are different than sefer Torah. Kriyas Torah is very important, maybe, and that's why for the mitzvah of Kriyas Torah, mitzvah derabim, and a public mitzvah, they were lenient, even though otherwise some Rishonim say that they were not lenient to allow doing shvus to shvus even for a mitzvah. Max Shekel says that there are some Rishonim who say that we don't do shvus to shvus even for Kriyas Torah, apparently even to read the Torah, so they don't hold like this. So how do they explain this Gemara? So he says that the issue is shas sakana. The issue is that because of sakana, that's the reason they were lenient. Sakana doesn't just mean they couldn't do it openly. Sakana means if they wouldn't have found a solution, they couldn't have done Kriyas Torah at all. They would have entirely had to forego for some period of time. There were Xeris in that time. It would have been they would have simply not had Kriyas Torah for a long time. That was so imperative that they had to make a leniency. They had to make a dispensation and allow violating the Isur Drabanan. But in an ordinary case, we have Kriyas Torah every week, just 1 week, the Sefer Torah is stuck somewhere else, and it wasn't brought into the Shul on Shabbos. So for 1 week, you don't have Kriyas Torah, and you can't even do Isur Drabanan in order to enable a Kriyas Torah. The Gemara brings a machlokas now, a machlokas amoraim. We pass like Rabbi Shimon, that you were allowed to carry from one gag to another, from a chatzar to a gag, from a gag to a chatzar. There is a sheet in the Gemara, though. Rav says that's only if there's no eruv in the individual chatzar. It sounds paradoxical. Why would no eruv make it more lenient? And the reason is because if there's no eruv, you aren't carrying kalim from the house to the chatzar. So any kalim in the chatzar, we can be pretty sure was there ben hashmashas. And those kalim are fine. You can carry from one chatzar to the other, to the gag, and so on. But if there's an eruv in the chatzar, then all Shabbos you're carrying kalim out from the house to the chatzar. And those kalim, you might get mixed up and carry those kalim to the next chatzar. That you're not allowed to do. Kalim sheshavsu b'bayis, the Mishnah said you're not allowed to do. So if you made an eruv in the chatzar, we're nervous that you may wind up carrying kalim sheshavsu b'bayis into the next chatzar. That you can't do. We don't paskin like that. We paskin that bein eruv, bein shelo eruv. Rabbi Yochanan says that regardless of whether there was an eruv in the chatzar or not, and there are kalim in the chatzar from the bayis, you'll keep track. You'll be careful. You won't carry kalim that were shavsu b'bayis to the next chatzar, even if now they're in the chatzar. But you may carry kalim that were shavsu b'chatzar into the next chatzar. That's how we paskin. Otherwise, it'd be gzeir to be gozer. Don't even carry kalim sheshavsu b'chatzar because maybe you'll carry kalim shavsu b'bayis. That's gzeira, and we don't do that. The post can point out, the Gemara says that if you have kalim sheshavsu b'bayis, even if now they're in the chatzar, which is mutter because you have an eruv, you still can't carry those kalim to the next chatzar. Because since ben hashmashas they were in the bayis, as we explained earlier, you can't carry those kalim. Mishnah Berurah explains, the post can bring, that extends also to kalim, that kalim that you took out because there was an eruv, or even if there's no eruv, kalim that you took from the house to the chatzar be'isr, or kalim that you wore out. You wore your coat, it was a cold day, you wore your coat from the house, you wore it outside, to sit outside, then you took the coat off, and now you want to carry the coat to the next chatzar. That you can't do because they were kalim shavsu b'bayis, even though they got to the chatzar legitimately via an eruv or via wearing them. It doesn't matter. Since these kalim were shavsu b'bayis, they cannot be carried to the next chatzar. What's not so clear, the Mishnah Berurah says, is are you allowed to carry that coat within the chatzar? Let's say there's no eruv in the chatzar. Your coat was in the house, so you can't carry the coat out into the chatzar because there's no eruv. Let's say you wore the coat out from the house to the chatzar, and then you took it off. Can you carry the coat out around in the chatzar? That's machlokes poskim. Mishnah Berurah says, look in the Bir Halacha, he brings different shitas about that. There's a machlokes whether if the kalim got to the chatzar by wearing them. There's a machlokes whether you're allowed to carry those kalim within the chatzar if there's no eruv chatzeros in the chatzar. Bir Halacha also brings that problem, that potential problem only applies if the kalim were not being worn ben hashmashos, they were in your closet ben hashmashos, and then after Shabbos began, Friday night, later, or Shabbos morning, you put on the coat, you wore it out, and then you took it off in the chatzar, and now you want to carry it around. That's machlokes poskim. But if you were wearing the clothing when Shabbos began, then it's considered the kalim are not kana shvisa anywhere, they're bottled to the person, and then it's like kalim shavsu b'chatzar. If you took them off in the chatzar, you can carry them around in the chatzar because they are kalim shavsu b'chatzar. They have the leniencies of kalim shavsu b'chatzar. On Daf Tzadi Beis, the Mishnah talks about a gag gadol samach legag katan. That means a large roof next to a small roof, which means the small roof is completely open. One whole side is open. It's open to a large roof, which means that part of the fence, part of the walls are there. There's an opening in the middle to the katan. So the katan is totally open. The gadol is partially open. So the Mishnah talks about the halachos of Eruvin in that context, where the gedola muteres, the ketana asura, because the ketana is considered parts entirely to the gadol. There's no eruv between them. The gadol is not considered entirely parts to the katan because there are walls there. The Gemara extends this paradigm to other halachos, to laws of minyan. The Gemara says tzibur b'gedola. If you have a minyan in the large chatzar and the shliach tzibur is b'ketana, then they're yotze. The shliach tzibur is considered davening with the minyan. They can be yotze with him because he's considered as though he's with the gedola, because that's considered a door and he's considered with them. However, if the tzibur is b'ketana, the shliach tzibur is b'gedola. If the chazan is in the ketana if the tzibur is in the ketana and the chazan is in the gedola, then they're not yotze. Similarly, the Gemara says if there are 9 people in the gedola and a single person in the ketana, then he's mitzaref to the minyan, and they have 10. If there's 9 people in the ketana, however, and 1 in the gedola, they are not mitzaref. Tosfos says the problem is not just 9 and 1 in the wrong direction. Even 5 and 5 is not. Even 5 and 5 is not good. The only thing that works is when you have 1 in the ketana and 9 in the gedola. That works. This is how we paskin in the laws of davening. If you have gagos or chatzeros, again, one of them is open totally and one of them is open part of the way through. So we paskin that if the tzibur is in the large one and the yachid is in the small one, that's a minyan, but not vice versa. Mishnah Berurah explains the yachid can be viewed as being pulled over into the rabbin, but the rabbin can't be viewed as being pulled over to the gedola. The rabbin can't be viewed as being pulled over to the individual. Similarly, in the case of the gedola and the ketana, the people in the ketana can be viewed as being pulled into the gedola, but not vice versa. So if the rabbin is in the gedola and the yachid is in the ketana, everything is lined up. The ketana is going to the gedola and the yachid is going to the rabbin, so that's fine. But if the rabbim are in the ketana and the yachid is in the gedola, it doesn't work because the rabbin can't be pulled into the gedola because rabbin can't be pulled by a yachid, and the yachid can't be pulled into the ketana because the gedola can't be pulled into the ketana. So you're stuck. Similar halacha applies to the shliach tzibur. Same rule that if the tzibur is in the ketana, and the shliach tzibur is in the gedola, it doesn't work. But if the tzibur is in the gedola and the chazan, the shliach tzibur is in the ketana, they can pull him in, and it's as if he's with them. That was true in the time of Chazal when he was actually motzi them in the davening. Even today, where he's not motzi them, but if he wants to say kaddish and kedusha, he can't say kaddish. Even if there's a full minyan in the gedola of the Mishnah, even if there's a minyan in the gedola, they can pull the chazan to them, and he can say kaddish wherever he is. But if there would be a minyan, even a full minyan of the ketana and a shliach tzibur in the gedola, then that doesn't work because we can't view him as being pulled to the ketana because the gedola can't be pulled to the ketana and they can't be pulled to him, and he doesn't have a minyan. So even though they have a minyan, he's not with a minyan, so he can't say kaddish and kedusha. If you have a full 10 and a shliach tzibur in one of them, then people in the other one can answer because anyone can answer. Even if they're outside, they can answer. But if you have a shliach tzibur in the gedola and even a full minyan of the ketana, they're stuck because he can't be pulled out of the gedola into the ketana, and they can't be pulled from where they are to go to where a yachid is, so therefore they're stuck, and then he can't say kaddish and kedusha. On Daf Tzadi Gimel, Rav Chisda has a statement: Gidud chamisha, mechitza chamisha. If you have a hill, a little mound that's 5 tefachim high, and then a mechitza that's 5 tefachim high, so Rav Chisda says ein mitztarfin. They don't join to be a 10 tefach wall. We don't paskin like that. The Gemara later brings Maremer says Gidud chamisha, mechitza chamisha is mitztarfin. That as long as you have 10 total, that's fine. That's how we paskin in Shulchan Aruch. If you have a hill, a tail that's 5 tefachim high, and then you built a mechitza on top, 5 tefachim high, that is considered a full-blown, bona fide 10 tefach mechitza. The Bir Halacha has some interesting questions about this. He says, what if the hill is not totally straight? The hill, like a lot of hills, is a slope. It's a slanty hill. And then on top, you put a vertical wall. So normally the rule is when you have a slanted hill, that can be a mechitza, as long as the slope is such that it's mislakate 10 tefachim high within a lateral distance of 4 amos, that's fine. That's considered steep enough, or steeper than that, that's steep enough to be a wall. So if the hill is that slope or steeper, and then you have a straight up wall, you can argue that should be mitzaref, because they both have the status of walls, so that's fine. Or you can argue that the reason a steep hill is considered a wall is because you can't really walk on the hill because it's too steep. He says, but here where the hill doesn't go 10 tefachim high, you could walk on it, so it's not considered a mechitza at all, and it won't be mitzaref to a 5 tefach wall. So the Mishnah Berurah is not sure about that. Another suffix he says, let's say the hill is only a couple of tefachim tall. It's not even 3 tefachim tall. We have a rule throughout the Masechta. Things that are less than 3 tefachim are like they're not there. They're negligible. They're de minimis. They're buckled to the ground. So maybe if the hill is only 2 tefachim, it's like it's not here at all. And even if there's 8 tefachim of a fence on top, it doesn't matter. Or do you say no? Since with the 8 tefachim, it's 10 tefachim tall, that is a valid mechitza. Another question the Biur Halacha raises is, it's one thing if the mechitza is built on the very edge of the hill. So then you have the hill and then the wall, and that's all together, it's 10 tefachim. Or if there's a gap between them, he says. So he says if the gap is 3 tefachim, or certainly if it's 4 tefachim, he says, it doesn't work. Just like in other places we say that if there's such a gap, it's considered 2 walls that are separated by that gap would be considered 2 separate walls. The Mishnah Berurah is not sure. Or he says maybe not. Maybe let's say you have an individual hill, and the hill has a slope, a steep slope, and then it flattens out and plateaus a little bit, and then it continues to rise. So that the Mishnah Berurah says, Mistaver, it's good as long as the overall slope is 10 tefachim high by 4 amos wide, even if there are some flat spots on it. As long as in toto the slope is steep enough and high enough, that is considered a good slope. So maybe here too, if you have a hill and then a plateau and then you build a wall, maybe that's also considered like one long zigzagging slope. Maybe that is good. These questions are discussed at length also in Rav Blau's Nesiva Shabbos, classic work on Eruvin. He says, some say they're only mitzaref if they're within 3 tefachim of each other. The hill and the wall have to be within 3 tefachim. Some say even if they're not within 3 tefachim, they're mitzaref. 3 tefachim, more than 3 tefachim, he brings a similar question about a single wall or a single wall or hill that has a flat part and then rises up again. And stairs, he says, this is relevant to stairs. If you have stairs, so if each stair, if the horizontal distance between the horizontal width of the stair is less than 3 tefachim, he says, then it's a mechitza, because the vertical parts of the stair, as long as the total stair, the height is more than 10 tefachim, and they're separated by small lateral distances of less than 3 tefachim, he says, so each one is considered one wall, even though the stair goes up stairwise in separate pieces. If the height of the stairs too, he says, is less than 3 tefachim, then you evaluate the whole thing as a slope, he says, whether it's 10 tefachim high in 4 amos wide, whether the stairs are steep enough to meet those criteria. On Daf Tzadi Daled, the Mishnah, the Gemara talks about the concept of pi tikra. Now let's say you have a house, and some of the walls are missing, but the roof is still intact, and you want to know if you have valid mechitzas. You only have some of the mechitzas are left, and there's some open space. So the Gemara talks about a concept called pi tikra. If the roof is intact and certain conditions are met, we look at the roof as if you drop an imaginary wall down, and that makes up the 4th wall. The Gemara brings Machlokas Rav and Shmuel about this, whether you say pi tikra, and then the Gemara says that the Gemara asks Stira and Shmuel, and the Gemara says ki lesle bedalid. When Shmuel doesn't hold a pi tikra, that's with 4, but b'shalosh isle with 3 he does. What does that mean? So there are 3 opinions in the Rishonim. Rashi says Machlokas Rav and Shmuel is when you have a roof with no walls and you want to use pi tikra on all 4 sides. That's where Shmuel says it doesn't work, and Rav says it works even there. But even Shmuel agrees that if you have 1 or more walls, then you will say pi tikra. We paskin like Rav, so that means we paskin even when there's no walls. You say pi tikra on all 4 sides. So Rashi is the most lenient view that according to Rav, you say the Machlokas Rav and Shmuel is when there are no walls, and still Rav says you say pi tikra on all 4 sides. The Shita of the Rif and the Rush, the Shita of the Rif and the Rambam, Rabbeinu Chananel, they say that the Machlokas Rav and Shmuel is when there are 3 is when there are 3 walls. That's the Machlokas Rav and Shmuel. Rav says as long as there are 3 walls, you say pi tikra on the 4th wall. Shmuel says nope. That if you only have 3 walls, you don't say pi tikra. When you have 4 walls, then you say pi tikra. If you have 4 walls, why do you need pi tikra? So they're garis in the Gemara. That they're garis in the Gemara differently. The garis in the Gemara ki lesle. Shmuel doesn't hold pi tikra b'shalosh when there are only 3 walls. B'dalad islay. So Rashi's garis ki lesle b'dalad b'shalosh islay. That means you need pi tikra on 4, but not when you need pi tikra on 3. The Rif is garis ki lesle b'shalosh. When you have 3 walls, you don't say pi tikra. But when you have 4 walls, then you do. Even according to Shmuel, why do you need pi tikra? Because there's a gap in one of the walls, and you need pi tikra fill in the gap. I'll call upon him according to the Rif, according to Rav, who we passing like you only say Pitikra if there are 3 walls. If there are 3 walls, Shmuel holds you still don't say Pitikra, but Rav holds you do. So according to Rashi, Rav says Pitikra even when there are 0 walls. According to the Rif, Rav says Pitikra when there are 3 walls. Then there's a Shita for Rabbeinu Tam and the Rosh and the Tur. They say you say Pitikra even when there are only 2 walls. It's in between Rashi and the Rif. The Rif says you need 3 walls. Rashi says 0 walls. Rabbeinu Tam Shita is that you need 2 walls. But Rabbeinu Tam says only if the 2 walls are in an L shape, then you say Pitikra. But if the 2 walls are parallel, not connected, then you don't say Pitikra if there are only 2 walls. How do we paskin? Shulchan Aruch is not entirely clear. Shulchan Aruch talks about Pitikra. The Ramah says that we say Pitikra even when there are 2 walls, but we say Pitikra with 2 walls as long as the walls are L-shaped, connected, not when there are 2 parallel walls. So we have the Rif who's more machmer and says you only say Pitikra when there are 3 walls. You have the Shita of the Rebbeinu Tam brought by the Ramah, the Yesh Omrim, that you say Pitikra even when there are 2 walls. How do we paskin? It's not entirely clear. In the laws of an Eruv, they say you can rely on Rebbeinu Tam when there are even with 2 walls when they're perpendicular and connected. You can rely on that when there are other mitigating factors. Normally, apparently, they say you should be machmer. They only say Pitikra if there are 3 walls, but there is basis to make it like Rebbeinu Tam even when there are 2 walls. Furthermore, the Ramah brings a chumrah. You only say Pitikra when there is baroch of akirui 4 tfachim. Others say you don't need 4 tfachim wide in the roof, but some say only when you have 4 tfachim. This is relevant in the case where you have awnings and overhang sticking out of a house, and you want to use Pitikra to drop an imaginary wall down and carry under that overhang. So you need some walls. We don't go like Rashi that even when there are no walls you say Pitikra. The question is how many walls. If the overhang juts out from the house is 1 wall, but we're going to require at least 2. So if you have 2 walls on the side, then you're going to have a situation of Pitikra. Even according to the Rif, if you only have 1 wall on the side, that's a question of Pitikra with 2 walls, and then that's going to be the Machlokes, Rebbeinu Tam, and the other Rishon. On Daf Tzadi Hey, the Gemara brings, again, going back to this question of the chutzner or the house where the walls collapsed on Shabbos. So the Mishnah brought an opinion that distinguished between this Shabbos and the next Shabbos. The Mishnah said that if they fell on Shabbos, they're mutter for the rest of that Shabbos, but they're usher for the next Shabbos. That should be Yehuda Shita. Rabbi Yossi said that doesn't make sense. If they're mutter, they'll be mutter for the next Shabbos as well. If they're usher, they should be usher for this Shabbos also. So what does Rabbi Yossi actually hold? We pass like Rabbi Yossi. What does Rabbi Yossi actually hold? Are they mutter for the next Shabbos or not? Or are they only mutter, or they're not even mutter for this Shabbos? So the Gemara on Daf Tzadi Hey discusses what does he mean. So Rabbi Yossi, the Gemara explains, Rabbi Yossi really holds is Kishem Shasurin La'asid Lavo. The Kachasurin La'osir Shabbos, he holds they're actually usher for this Shabbos as well. So this is how we paskin. We paskin like Rabbi Yossi. We paskin that if the walls fell down on Shabbos, then it's usher for next Shabbos, it's usher for this Shabbos as well. We don't say, since they were mutter for the beginning of Shabbos, it's mutter for the rest of Shabbos. An Eruv that fell down on Shabbos, you have to stop carrying. Separate discussion whether you should tell people to stop carrying or not. Some poskim are lenient in some cases if they don't realize the Eruv fell down, but in general, you have to stop carrying if the Eruv falls down. We don't say since it was mutter for part of Shabbos, you're grandfathered in for the rest of Shabbos. And poskim generally say you should tell people to stop carrying also, but that's a separate discussion. So that's how we paskin. Generally, we don't say even though it was mutter for Mitzvah Shabbos, it's mutter for the rest of Shabbos. The post can point out, even though in certain other contexts in Eruvin, we do say that. We do say once it was mutter for part of Shabbos, it's mutter for the whole Shabbos. That's when there are mechitzas, and something else is problematic and changes on Shabbos, the Eruv got eaten, or other types of cases like that, that's fine. But if the mechitzas actually fell down, then we say that it's usher. From now on it's usher. It was mutter until this point, and for the rest of Shabbos, though, it is usher. On Daf Tzadi Hey, also, we have the beginning of Perek HaMotzei Tefillin. Someone finds tefillin outside, and there isn't the proper Eruv, and he wants to carry them inside, so they shouldn't be in an insecure location. He wears them in. Rabbi Gamliel says he wears 2 at a time. The Tanna Kama says 1 at a time. Rabbi Gamliel says you wear 2 at a time. Why 2? Why not more than 2? What's special about 2? So the Gemara goes back and forth. The Gemara eventually says, Pshat Rabbi Gamliel is that there is space on your head to fit 2 tefillin at one time in the proper location of tefillin. If you just wrap tefillin around your foot, that's not wearing them, that's carrying them. But if you wear them in a place where it's the valid location for tefillin, that's called wearing, and you can carry them in. And you can fit 2 tefillin on your head in the place where the tefillin goes. So you can wear 2 at a time, but you can't fit more than 2. Similarly, on your arm, the Gemara says the same thing. There's room on the arm to wear 2 pairs of tefillin, but not more than that. Then the Gemara says, where is the place of tefillin? Rabbi Menashe says, Al Yodcha Zu Kibaris, the muscle, the part of the upper arm where it bulges out, like the bicep, where the muscle bulges in a curved shape above the straightness of the arm, and Beinei Necha, tefillin on the head should be Beinei Necha. So he says that's where Makom Shel Mocha Shel Tina Rofes, where the head, the brain of the child is soft, somewhere on the top of the head, not like the Tzedukim who wear it on the forehead. We wear tefillin on the top of the head, and there's space for 2 tefillin. There are different shittas in the Rishonim exactly what is meant by Makom Shel Mocha Shel Tina Rofes. It also talks about wearing the tefillin where the hair is, not on the forehead like the Tzedukim, wearing it up on the hair. This is the Machlokes when it says you can wear 2 tefillin. Many Rishonim understand it means 2 tefillin front to back. There's enough space in the head to fit 2 tefillin front to back. Others say the space is narrower on the top of the head, but you can fit the 2 tefillin side by side on the top of the head. In any event, the tefillin have to be up on the top of the head. There's room for 2 of them, but not more apparently. And they have to be where our Gemara says where the head is soft of a child, and the Gemara elsewhere says it has to be where there's hair. There's a whole string of poskim who are very concerned about wearing tefillin in the wrong place. Tefillin shel yad, we paskin, has to be, the Shulchan Aruch says, in the place where the bicep bulges. The Ramah says also it should be on the lower half of the upper of the top part of the arm, but not on the top half. Even though the muscle might continue on the top half, some poskim say you shouldn't wear it on that part of the arm. The tefillin should be on the lower part of the arm, where the muscle bulges, but not past half the arm. That's machlokes. There's machlokes about it. The Mishnah Berurah says that the Vilna Gaon, the Bir Hagra, says you can wear it on the entire upper arm. He says really l'chatchila you should avoid that. He says because the other posts can disagree. However, he says that below the part of the arm where the muscle comes out, he says that certainly you shouldn't wear it. He says. See, and that's why he says you shouldn't have tefillin that are too big. So he says if the tefillin are big and you don't have enough room, he says it's better to go on the top half of the arm than to go below where the muscle bulges, because below where the muscle bulges, he says, is you're not yotzei according to anybody. Above where the muscle bulges on the top half of the arm, at least the Vilna Gaon holds you're yotzei, even though other posts can say you don't. But ideally, he says you should not have. Ideally, he says your tefillin shouldn't be that big. He says because then it'll be hard to fit entirely where the muscle is, and also in the lower half of the upper part of the arm. But it's most imperative, he says, not to go below the muscle, because then you're not yotzei according to anybody, and the brachas levatala. And ideally, you should also not have it in the upper part of the arm either. When it comes to tefillin shel rosh, similarly, it says that the tefillin begin where the hairline is, not where the hair. If you have long hair and the hair goes down, it doesn't mean where the hair goes down. It means where the roots of the hair, where the hair leaves the forehead. Tefillin should begin above that point, which is and the end of it is where the end of the soft part of the head. There's different shittas in the Rishonim exactly what part of the head that is, but the Mishnah Berurah is very emphatic that it should not go below where the hairline begins. He rails about the fact Rabbim Nechshalim B'Isur, many people put the tefillin in the wrong place, and they think that that's the upper part. As long as the tefillin begins where the hairline begins, it can drop down lower onto the face. It's a terrible mistake. That's what the Tzedukim where he says it's. It has to go there, and anyone who wears that is like the Karaites and the Tzedukim. Everyone should be careful and should instruct other people to wear the tefillin in the right place to avoid chas v'shalom being considered a person who doesn't wear tefillin. If the tefillin move, you have to move them back, and so on. This thing, people sometimes today tell people that your tefillin are in the wrong place. Hopefully they say it nicely, but there's a long string of poskim. Mishnah Berurah spends a lot of time on this. Rav Kook wrote an entire sefer. I'm not sure how long it is, called Chavush Pa'er. He really rails about this. He talks about what a terrible thing it is, he says. Our heart should melt, he says. Our hair should stand up. And it's out of Yiras Hashem, he says. What are we going to say in the Yom Hadin, where Hashem wonders why we're not taking his mitzvah seriously? If even part of the tefillin goes below the hairline, he says, you're not making the mitzvah at all. It's like putting tefillin on your leg, he says. It completely mevatel the mitzvah, he says. He says Gedolim have complained about this, and they actually printed a sefer, he says. that Tikkun Olam Im Tziyurim, an illustrated guide to wearing tefillin. This is a century ago. He says, Zachar Osu Ish Latov, great schar that person gets. He says, it still didn't work. So all these signs you see in the shul, but where to wear the tefillin with pictures, this is not some kind of 20th century, 21st century frumkeit. This goes back a century ago. The Mishnah Berurah and Rav Kook were railing about people putting tefillin in the wrong place. Some poskim say that it's not even on the whole top of the head, it's only the first half of the top of the head. So again, the Mishnah Berurah says your tefillin shouldn't be so large. Because they absolutely, positively cannot go below the hairline. They also shouldn't go too high on the head, past halfway of the height of the head. But certainly they shouldn't go below the hairline. The Mishnah Berurah says it's better to go higher up. And again, B'yotzei according to at least some opinions, then go farther down. Ideally, you shouldn't have such big tefillin. But again, poskim have been saying for at least a century or more, poskim have been very perturbed by the fact that people weren't wearing the tefillin carefully. They're wearing them in the wrong part of the. They're wearing them on maybe the wrong part of the arm, but particularly the tefillin shel rosh. People are wearing the tefillin too low. It's a terrible problem. You're not yotzi the mitzvah. The Gemara talks about karkafta de lamanach tefillin, and it's a problem with brach lebatalas. So poskim for quite a long time have been warning, have been greatly concerned that people should wear the tefillin in the right place. People should make sure others are wearing the tefillin in the right place. Rav Kook says it's the responsibility of the Gedolim and the Rabbanim to ensure that people they see are wearing the tefillin in the right place. This is something very important. A person should learn, should try to understand where the right place to wear tefillin is, and make sure that all of his tefillin is in the required place. And that's why the early poskim and some contemporary experts suggest that a person not have such large tefillin. Chabad typically does have very large tefillin, but many poskim have recommended that a person should not have such large tefillin because it can be very difficult to fit the entire square or rectangle of the tefillin, the titura, the marvarta, the entire tefillin into the proper place.